So today we will, being the last day, we will try to also incorporate some practice or some practical methods, as there has been few requests how to apply the bodhicitta or how to apply all these view of shunyata into our daily life, or more precisely how to apply shamatha vipassana. Meditation is very personal. Meditation has to be preceded. Well, that's what the classic traditional training system encourages, that meditation should be preceded with abundance of hearing and contemplation. Because by the time you reach the meditation, you are completely in control. Of course, you know, it is good to always have an instructor who could maybe challenge you, critique you, or align you. And meditation, yes, meditation is, as Vasubandhu said, that is ultimately that's the only way we can taste the taste of shunyata or bodhicitta. That is probably the best way for this for this kind of beings like myself and you. It is not to say that meditation is the only way, and especially meditation that we know of, especially these days, that is definitely not the only way. Meditation technique itself comes in many different forms. Not just sitting straight, but it could come in the form of dance. It could come in the form of arranging a shrine, singing songs, arranging tea, I guess, like in places like Japan, arranging flowers. It can be as applicable as meditation while you brush your teeth or while you drive. So meditation is very personal and very vast. Later on, I will sort of just pick one, and as a gesture of as a gesture of doing something practical this time, we will sit for a few minutes. But before that, I will continue with the stanzas, as this is what I have been requested to teach the Bodhicharyavatara. I have been doing it fairly in a classic tradition, going through stanzas by stanzas. I don't know, in the future generations, such a way of teachings will continue, because patience to dwell on each stanzas is waning now, even in the Tibetan studies. In the traditional Buddhist school, they spend more than 6 months just on this text, every day going through each stanzas, several stanzas, and then we read many different commentaries. Although I have, as you have been noticing, I have been visiting 9th chapter again and again. This is so because I think the importance to establish the view is humongous. It is, I think, this is one aspect of Buddhist study and eventually practice. This is one aspect that is lacking everywhere. And it's understandable because study of view is very dry and very tedious, and it requires a lot of intellectual sort of analysis. It's not necessarily entertaining, and also somewhat you may even think it's not that practical to your day-to-day needs. But if we are to establish not only, of course, a genuine path of the Buddha Dharma in order to use it as a means to practice and achieve enlightenment, of course, establishing the view is important. But even academic study, for the academic study, establishing the view is the most important, I would say. I think many universities, both in the East and West, somehow we are now adopting a modern way of studying Buddhism, which requires a lot of anthropological, philological, and also history of Buddhism. Of course, I will not say those are not important. They are absolutely important, because this is where you also know why we say things that way and this way. Some of the discussions we had yesterday had a lot to do with it, I feel. For example, now it is in almost probably a little bit more than half a century that, maybe loosely, if I loosely say this, Tibetan Buddhism is sort of flourishing in the West. And as the Buddhism traveled to different parts of the world, you can clearly see how much it is being interpreted through different culture. Everything, every aspect of Buddhist studies gets interpreted in different way. Especially, but I think all the you can sort of relax, and you can even modify some of the Buddhist study according to the need and capacity of different people in different culture and different, time. But the view, the relative and the ultimate view of Buddhism cannot be altered. If you alter that, then it is no more the teaching of the Buddha. It is already altered. Of course, this is a free place. You can alter however you like. It's already happening, actually. The altering, cherry picking, designing Buddhism according to different way of thinking. But what really the teaching of the Buddha, what is taught by the Buddha, cannot be altered. But this is difficult, because to prove what is really taught by the Buddha is difficult. Partially, I would say, India, the ancient India, always had once upon a time it used to be a good habit not to make notes, not to carve on rocks, but listen to the teachings, and then you learn by heart and practice. But now it is proving that, this is proving and making Buddhist life difficult. Because, for instance, within the Buddhists there is a lot of debate. Just recently when I was in Taiwan, someone asked me, how do we prove that Mahayana Buddhism, which the text belongs to, is actually taught by the Buddha? Within Buddhism, there are many Charvaka or Theravadan Buddhists who will dispute Mahayana Buddhism actually probably maybe not a teaching of the Buddha. What hope is there to prove Tantric Buddhism is the teaching of the Buddha if Mahayana cannot be proved? Tantric Buddhism already, there's a strong opponent, not only from the Theravada, but also from the Mahayana. The great traveler Xuanzang, when he came to India and went back to China, in his own account, he has said, well, this is what is translated into Tibetan, this is what I've read, that when he was in Odiyana, I guess it is the present-day Swat Valley, he saw all these magicians flying, in the sky and performing all sorts of magic, who claims that they are Tantric Buddhists. And he said that we, the follower of the Buddha, for us, we should not be distracted by this kind of magic. This is only for shamanists and those who believes in this kind of supernatural power as the supreme truth, so on and so forth. But I was, so the person was asking me, how do we prove that Mahayana Buddhism is a teaching of the Buddha? If we have time, I guess we can discuss and we can go through all the texts and we can go on and on about that, but it won't prove much. But the problem is, how do we even prove? The whole Buddhists, forget Mahayana and Tantra, even the Theravadan Buddhists prove that Buddha actually taught. Where do we have? Where is the proof that Shakyamuni Buddha taught in a place called Varanasi, called Four Noble Truths? It could be made up. We don't really have much evidence because, as I said, in the past there was no recorded. Even those Abrahamic religion, they are already suffering, trying to prove. And they did quite a good job in recording everything. But recently I was reading an article somewhere that some of the early Christian writings are so difficult to read. Like, I guess in some of the early writings in the Christian, they don't seem to have space in each letters. So you could read a sentence like, God is now here. The same sentence can be read as God is nowhere. So it's very difficult to sort of, bring our very, very limited logic and analysis. For this reason, nevertheless, for this, hearing and contemplation is utmost important before we embark into meditation. And this is what we are supposed to be doing. First of all, I don't have any confidence in teaching, but I have even much less confidence in guiding somebody with a meditation. Teaching, contemplation, hearing, and we call it argument, debate. analysis. That is really important. This is what Lord Maitreya have encouraged. We have to do this. And initially, your own, not feeling, your own logical mind will have to come to a conclusion that this is the truth. This makes sense, that this is the path that you will follow. For that, you need to be equipped with enough hearing and contemplation. And that is what we are supposed to be doing. And as I said, it is, again, we have a lot of challenge. I'm getting a little distracted here. I was talking about how in the West, now, like Tibetan Buddhism, has been there for about half a century, but the local habit, cultural habit, and also religious habit, many in the West, they have somehow, one way or another, even the atheists, those who claims to be atheists, they somehow, one way or another, have habitual residual on Christianity, some sort of a theistic thinking. It's not like, even though they may be not born in a Christian family even though you may never be grown up as a Christian, but the whole environment, everything we are talking about, the fact that you have a holiday on Sunday, fact that you are celebrating Christmas, Thanksgiving, all of this somehow creates a invisible, almost invisible, habitual and cultural culture. And when we pour Buddhism into that, there is a difficulty. There's really a difficulty. I have been teaching in the West for some time, and many times I have a challenge to teach non-duality. As much as the concepts such as non-duality and emptiness is so intellectually impressive, because it is, very deductive, it is very deconstructing, especially the modern philosopher, they love this. But then the danger is it gets interpreted very, very subtly into something very nihilist. Even the choice of words, there is now a big awareness about what we should choose the word between interdependent or dependent arising. Because interdependent, the choice of word interdependent, now we feel that sometimes the way the Westerners understand the interdependent actually is not really portraying the Madhyamika's dependent, the essence of the dependent arising, interdependent and dependent arising. Words like compassion, words like confession, as we have read in the Bodhicharyavatara in the initial stage, it means something different to a different culture. Every time we talk about, let's say in the Tantric Buddhism, we have like practice of confession, like Vajrasattva mantra, so on and so forth. And the way the Abrahamic background people, where they hear, where they interpret negative emotions, very close to idea of sin. Also, Buddha nature, first of all, presenting the Buddha nature to many of this cultural background is difficult. It ends up somehow it's easier to convince everything is emptiness to certain cultural background people. It's much more difficult to convince that your basic nature is Buddha. It's so difficult to convince. And many times they get inspired by that. They get so high when you say, oh, I have the Buddha nature. But that is a very dangerous, because I don't know how, with what reason they are getting high. If it is a right reason, then we are very happy. But it could be something else. That kind of high, blissed out, so dangerous. It could. It's again falling into sort of eternalist habit. Now, I'm talking about the West and how the West interprets, but this is not only in the West. As we have been discussing yesterday. Even in India, I would say, if there's one gene or one species that can chew and digest non-dualism, it has to be Indians. I have said this before. Indians can, I think, hear, be at home, digest, taste the idea of non-dualism. I'm very interested in the choice of words of non-duality or shunyata in Chinese and also in Japanese, because many times, again, with the Chinese, the morality and ethic, and the habit of ancestor worship, all of this does have an influence on understanding words from people like Śāntideva. It does. But going back to the Indian, one would think that, I still think the Indians would actually, this is a country where you have serene-looking gods, and then suddenly you have gods with a monkey face. All fits well. This is a country where giant gods sit on a lotus, and the lotus is not crushed. And no Indians even bother to ask and think, how come this big, deity is sitting on this small lotus, and lotus is still intact? Isn't there sort of mathematical, mistake here? They don't understand this. So you have that habit. You have that in genes. But as we talked yesterday, I think again, down the line, there seems to be a lot of different interpretation of karma and rebirth. And I think we are going to if we have time later on, we are going to be discussing this later on. Among the Buddhists in India, their interpretation of karma, their interpretation of rebirth, based on what they think Hindus are interpreting, and therefore the consequences of that, there seems to be a lot of that. So many times we will have to just do more hearing and more contemplation and more study to really get across what is meant when a Tibetan teacher says karma and rebirth. What is meant? What does he really mean? And how an Indian is conceiving this, how an Indian is understanding this, how a Westerner is understanding this. Because, as I was saying yesterday, like for the Somalian, solid means liquid. If the word karma, when you hear the word karma, if you hear it as a synonymous to emptiness, you are very good. Then it is really getting close to the understanding of the Buddhist concept of karma. If you are hearing karma based on some sort of a predestined or free will, then your karmic understanding is, I would say, not really according to the Buddhas. Because predestined, free will, both seem to have a dualistic stain. Like something you cannot change, or you can do whatever you like. But if the karma is understood, as I said yesterday, for the Madhyamikan, anything that is, the moment you hear the words cause, condition, and effect, they hear as unborn. Likewise, when you hear the word karma, if you can somehow train yourself to think that this word is a synonymous to emptiness. Because until you have a background of emptiness, karma won't work. If the emptiness is taken out, karma will end up becoming almighty creator. It will become a burden. This kind of understanding need to be established. And, by and large, in the Shastras such as this, you will, if you study this, you will learn these things. And then I think that's the only way to sort of habituate ourselves and sort of, I don't know, strengthen our spiritual life, our spiritual path. Because otherwise, just like in the West, I think even in India, the base for huge misunderstanding, I'm just beginning to realize these things, based on a very big misunderstanding seems to be there. For instance, like a precious human body that, you remember, Śāntideva has been talking about how, this body, this spoiled body, you should give this spoiled body this a little bit of wage, make him work for you, don't work for this body's spoiled, all of that, and then towards the end, but you can make use of this body as a means to help others. If you do that, your body will become priceless jewel, precious human body. When we talk about that, clearly we are not talking about caste here. So, like based on what we have discussed yesterday during the question and answer, if you have a good karma, and what do we mean by good karma from the Buddhist sense? What do we mean by good karma? Someone who is closer to the truth. That's the fundamental way of judging the good karma. Someone like a Milarepa, he will not look at Bill Gates and see what a product of a good karma. He will look at someone like Bill Gates and see, wow, may I never ever reborn even as his pet. Because for someone like Milarepa, the most important is to understand the truth. And by being reborn in higher caste, higher birth, richer family, whatever, more affluent, powerful, means you have a less chance to get close to the truth, lesser chance. So, as you can see, the birth, higher and the lower birth, is very much based on who has the ability to see the truth and also help other sentient beings. That's how to, the Buddhists would think. So in this sense, many times it could be your good karma to be reborn as so-called by a society or low caste, because you are more likely to be closer to the truth than deceived by wealth and power and so on and so forth. I'm just saying that to really study the Buddhist philosophy and Buddhist view, and therefore Buddhist methods, I think we have to have awareness of all these situations. Okay, so now if I continue the text, we begin with the 6th chapter, and in this chapter we talk about patience, which is one of the 6 paramita. Tolerance, patience. Okay, tolerance. The most supreme tolerance is tolerance to the truth. We call it miche vichela zabataba. Tolerance to the truth of unborn or shunyata or emptiness. That is the most difficult tolerance one can establish or one can achieve. In order to achieve the supreme tolerance, we then first go through the relative tolerance, which is going against clinging to the self-cherishing and going against, therefore, against the aggression. So we hear Śāntideva saying, a single aggression could destroy thousands of lifetimes or eons virtue instantly. Therefore, there is nothing that is more hideous than aggression. And with the same reason, there is no greater penance than the practice of patience. For this reason, the bodhisattva must again and again try to train mind in strengthening the patience or the tolerance. If we keep grudge or discontent in our heart, peace is almost impossible to arise. And if there is no peace, joy and bliss will not happen. You will also lose your sleep, and you will not become stable. Even though you may be generous, and caring, if you are not tolerant, we have observed that even the servant can revolt towards you. Having lack of tolerance will discourage friends and relatives and create sadness among them. Even though your generosity can magnetize them, if you have tolerance, after magnetizing them, you will not be able to maintain them with you. To be precise, there is no evidence that through the aggression comes bliss. Therefore, a bodhisattva must know by putting effort in combating the aggression again and again, the bodhisattva will be joyful in this life and also in the next life. To generate the tolerance, first the bodhisattva must always watch out to this discontented mind. If discontented or unease mind, if there is an obstacle in our life, immediately one has to learn to be content and learn to shorten the uneasiness. Because if you don't, this feeling of discontent and feeling unhappy will become a vessel or become a cause for the aggression to grow. Therefore, one must try to remove the sustenance of the aggression, which is this discontented or unhappy mind. Again and again, the bodhisattva must tell himself that the only job the aggression has is to stir me and destroy me. Therefore, I shall never bow down to this aggression. Such way the bodhisattva must train it themselves. Even though, and then bodhisattva must keep on thinking, even though we lose our temper, there's a very little evidence that losing the temper actually accomplish what you need to accomplish. Moreover, losing the temper opens the door for destroying all the virtuous thoughts and actions. Bodhisattva must remind himself, if you can alter and mend what is being broken, then what is the point to be unhappy? But if what is broken cannot be mended, if you are hurt or if you are crushed, if you are mishandled, and if that cannot be mended, then what is the point of being unhappy? Ordinarily, we think and we don't wish to hear anything unpleasant. We don't want to hear, we don't want our friends to hear this, we don't want our relatives to hear this, and usually we don't mind or we are happy if our enemy hears unpleasant things. Cause of the happiness is very rare and it only arises occasionally. Cause of the unhappiness is abundance. It comes at all times. A bodhisattva must, when the bodhisattva gets hurt, when the bodhisattva suffers, when the bodhisattva is mistreated, bodhisattva must remember that without the suffering, the bodhisattva will not have renunciation or revulsion towards the samsara. In this way, the bodhisattva must try to stabilize the bodhisattva's mind. Even for a meager achievement of higher rebirth or a prosperity, etc., people who follow, I think this is a goddess, Karnapa and probably Uma, who worships these worldly deities with sacrificing. They go through all sorts of penance. You, the bodhisattva, who has pledged yourself to liberate all sentient beings, how can you not practice the tolerance? And bodhisattva must remember that everything eventually can be tolerated, because no matter what happens, there's nothing that cannot be accustomed to. So first the bodhisattva must learn to appreciate in being tolerant to small downfall or suffering. And then gradually bodhisattva must learn to be patient and tolerant to bigger suffering or downfall. A bodhisattva must learn to not give in to small discomfort. Because if you give in to, and if you can't tolerate small discomfort like heat, cold, wind, if you don't learn to be tolerant with these kind of discomfort, then the strength of tolerance will become weakened. And then as the bigger suffering or pain or discomfort arise, the bodhisattva will not be able to face. Bodhisattva must learn this way by tolerating small incidents, discomforts. By doing that, gradually the bodhisattva will develop the courage. In this world, sometimes when you see your own blood flowing, some people get even more courageous. Others, by seeing another person's blood, they faint. This proves that the character or the strength can be developed and trained. Therefore, try to always overcome, or it's almost like be mean to this wishing to be free from small discomfort. Again and again, make sure that small discomforts are not taking you over. When the bodhisattva battles with these discomforts and obstacles, of course the bodhisattva will face more obstacles. as the more obstacle obstacle increases, the bodhisattva must also encourage himself to increase or to strengthen his sort of ratio of patience and tolerance. That way, the bodhisattva can be labeled as the warrior or the courageous one. Otherwise, it is like stabbing a dead body. Similarly, the gift of the suffering is the suffering creates sadness, and sadness will dent your pride. And through this sadness, you can also have empathy towards those who suffer. And through the suffering, you will also gradually learn to refrain from the cause of the suffering, which is the non-virtue. You will then begin to learn to put emphasis on cause of the happiness, which is the virtue. Now more reason why we should be tolerant. A bodhisattva must be tolerant to other sentient beings because these beings are in themselves a slave of their own emotions and ailment. When one gets sick with like jaundice or headache or whatever, why don't we lose our temper to these disease? Why do we have to single out the obstacles or the suffering obstacles that those who possess mind? Meaning, why do you have to be angry to those who are why do you have to be angry? Why you have to be impatient to someone who has mind? Why not to something that does not have mind? All these ailments such as jaundice, heart disease, headache, they also come because of cause and condition. Without wanting, even though we do not desire, when the cause and condition comes, these sufferings, they appear. Likewise, all these hostile sentient beings, your enemies, they are also, without them really wanting to, their own emotion takes over their mind state, and then that's how they also are powerless. Most of these sentient beings, they don't wish to be angry, but because they are under the spell of cause and condition, even without wishing, they lose their temper. All the downfall, all the negative emotions and actions, they all arise because of cause and conditions. These beings have no control over cause and conditions. Cause and conditions also, in itself, they have no intention to be the cause and condition of suffering. And then here Śāntideva talks about, this is some of those sarcasm, occasional sarcasm. Here, there is no God, there is no self that is intentionally creating these emotions. Therefore, all these emotions arises due to dependent arising, due to cause and conditions, not a ultimately truly existing original cause and conditions. Remembering this, Bodhisattva must tolerate, because the Bodhisattva, having this information of cause and condition, this information about shunyata, must remember when you face a hostile person or an obstacle, remembering that this person is under the spell of a cause and condition, must generate the tolerance. Because intolerance or impatience is like the cause of all the downfall. Okay, we'll take a break here. I think this tea break.